to the work session of January 17th, 2023. Clerk Moss, are we all set? I don't see the on air yet, so I just thought I'd check.
Give that one moment of we're getting the PowerPoint for GRs.
Okay, we're getting things set up.
Oh, and Erin is virtual. Hi.
Yes, today is January 17th, so the legislature is beginning their work today.
Oh, look here too. Everybody's on.
So we're not getting started just yet.
We are good to go, Madam Chair. I'm just working on getting the PowerPoint for GR.
We're going to wait for you to do that.
Thank you.
That's our next topic. I don't know. You're supposed to go to the mountain to practice. I know.
It was a long walk. And it's where I had.
Ooh, wrong shoulder.
Yeah, I can practice the other side.
Yeah, this goes. The chief.
Good.
No, I don't know, you know.
And the final Jeopardy question is.
No pressure, Kevin. You're in the chair.
Yeah.
All right, over to you, Chair.
Okay, well, here we are. We're picking back up at work session on January 17th, 2023. Our next topic is the 2023 state legislative session kickoff and update. Turn it over to you, Ms. Doyle.
Thank you and good morning, Chair and Board. Erin Doyle, your Senior Government Relations Manager, reporting live from Salem in our AOC conference rooms.
Yay!
My fellow GR professional is literally sitting in the conference room next to me so that we can avoid feedback issues, but we appreciate that we can be remote so that we can represent you down here in Salem through this 2023 legislative session. With that, next slide, please. So just really quickly, what we're going to talk about today is give you just a really quick reminder of what a long session looks like, and then we'll go into the issues that we're considering hot topics to start with, and other bills and information related to the priorities that this board adopted in December. And then we'll talk through really briefly what our next steps look like and how we will continue to work with you throughout the session, because no good deed goes unannounced. No good bill goes left behind, and every bad bill still shows up too. So with that, next slide. So just to provide a really quick overview, the long session, it happens every odd year, is the biennial budget. And the only thing the legislature is technically required to accomplish in any given session, particularly in the odd years, is just pass the state's budget. In passing the state budget, they set their priorities, fund their programs that they believe to be most important and most necessary to move forward. but it opens up a lot of world of opportunity for investment in things that we care about. But just because all they have to do is pass a budget, that doesn't mean that's the only concept that's coming through. So as noted on this slide, there have been over 1,800 pre-session filed bills. I think I checked last night, and I haven't checked this morning at what the number is now, but there were almost 1,900 bills pre-session filed. So that's a lot of concepts that we are still sorting through. I will say the vast majority of what I've come to look at has been what we call a placeholder bill with a relating to clause that will allow a lot of legislative concepts into it. So for example, relating to land use is a common bill, and it says something about something that's not actually the intention of what the bill will be used for, but that is because of some of the deadlines and requirements that were set up by the state legislature leadership. So other highlights for this session, we have a brand new governor, we have a brand new Senate president office, but we also do not have a supermajority in either house. So a lot of work has to be done related to anything that any side wants to get accomplished through the session. Next slide, please. So really quickly, this is the infamous legislative calendar. This is the one that's put out by the professionals who actually run the legislature, so the House Clerk's office. Just to highlight some days that we're looking forward to, the red boxes are deadlines. It's really hard to read on this calendar, and in future iterations, we'll give you shorter versions of the calendar so you can maybe have a chance at reading these things. But there's a deadline this year for getting concepts into Legislative Council to be introduced as independent bills, which is why we're seeing so many relating to clauses that are very large. And those are expected to come back by no later than mid-February. The first deadline for the first chamber deadline is in March. And really the boxes that are of most importance to your GR team's sanity come in June. There's a target sine die date of June 15th, but a constitutional sine die date of June 25th. That's set by the number of days that are allowed to be in any given long session that of course can be worked around if there's agreement by all legislators to try and get the budget done, but everybody knows they want to be out of here before July. So that's our overall schedule. There's a lot of green boxes where they're meeting. There are a ton of committees, there are a ton of concepts, and there is a ton of time that will feel very compressed over the next 6 months. So with that, next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the hot topics we plan to cover. I was hoping to have a little more solidity under the semiconductor section, but we'll have a conversation in a moment about what that's looking like. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the housing and homelessness world, which is a top priority for the legislature on both sides, as well as the governor's office. And then Zucker will talk about what's going on in the health and human services world and in the revenue space, which are some pretty key priorities for us as a county. Next slide. So setting some further context around what's happening in the semiconductor space. There is a joint semiconductor committee that is co-chaired by Representative Bynum and Senator Salmon. There are a number of representatives and senators from Washington County that are sitting in this space, and they're really looking at what they can accomplish in the first 30 days. And the reason for that is that in the first 30 days is kind of setting us up to finalize the state's application to become a CHIPS hub, which makes it easier for other folks to pull down those significant funds that are coming out of the federal government related to the CHIPS Act as private companies. But in addition to that, the hub itself provides resources to the state to really invest and really exceed what we're currently capable of doing. Oregon has a reputation for being one of the leading places to do the research and development in the semiconductor space. We have a lot of businesses from, small shops that feed up into the larger businesses that are kind of the name brand around what the CHIPS Act is going for. But really the intention that I have seen in all of the folks related to the semiconductor investment that we are hoping the state will make aren't just focused on one business. They are focused on growing all of the sectors within that semiconductor space and making sure that we're ready to see that type of investment of the supply for the suppliers, the smaller businesses, the medium-sized businesses that are trying to grow in Oregon and really take advantage of the way we've been a leader in this space and the importance it has in our statewide economy. So within those first 30 days to support that CHIPS Act application, they're really looking at 4 buckets, as they say. Incentives, workforce and education, and the land readiness. So the incentives piece is where our SIP and gain share conversation is really going to take place. We are working now to see what we can accomplish in these first 30 days as far as getting those more right-sized to current dollar values, particularly in the gain share space where our investments are really being looked after and looked for partnership from the state to make sure that those resources really mean what they meant in 2015 dollars. And can continue to grow over time. The other pieces of all the incentives related to SIP agreements, we are currently having conversations and looking into what is negotiable at the local level and therefore needs to be our internal policies versus what actually needs to change in the statute to accommodate our ability to negotiate those agreements so that they work favorably for the county, for the community, and creating livable spaces, not just meeting the needs of in the specific property. In the workforce and education spaces, those are spaces where we're trying to make sure that we're doubling down on the investments that have already been made to create a pipeline of folks who can work at all levels, not just the PhDs, but also the folks who are doing the electricians' work and working within the trades, making sure that those jobs have a career path that can be accessed once you go through a Work Systems Inc. program or a PCC program that gets you sized to create that area median income job without having to invest in a college tuition to get there, but also looking at what our college programs can provide to become that support network that really shows to folks doing research and development in the semiconductor space that we have the workforce here that's ready at all levels to support and supply them with the workforce that they need moving forward. The one thing I will say is we've had this conversation a little bit during the work session, and we were hoping to have a little more ground under our feet, pun fully intended in this instance, on what that land supply, land readiness looks like. That conversation is still waiting for a final report out from the site readiness or the land supply subcommittee of the task force. So that report hasn't been completely finalized yet, but kind of looking at what does that large lot need is a huge part of that, but also making sure that we have site readiness that's available for those smaller and medium-sized vendors within the ladder of semiconductor advanced manufacturing and support services. So it's not just making sure that we have one big large lot and that's going to take care of the question, but making sure that we have the resources from the state to make those lands available for quicker development, not just for one really large lot, but for lots of a variety of sizes from 50 acres to 100 acres to the larger lot properties that become the center of the land use conversation. What still is not clear is whether or not there will be a super siting provision. They're really looking to see if they can find solutions inside the urban growth boundary that would not require that type of super siting, but that question has not been fully answered yet in finalizing what it's really going to take to have a favorable application go into the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in talking with the staff in Representative Bonamici's office, they're also tracking this very closely. This is something that's incredibly important, not just to Senators Wyden and Merkley, but also to Congresswoman Bonamici's office, is there's a lot of investments that become available for Oregon if we become a hub and create opportunities for good living wage jobs for with an opportunity for more folks to get into those median income jobs that are above a living wage and above minimum wage. So finding out from them what the Department of Commerce is really focusing in on for Oregon is the final stage, and making sure that we have right-sized this initial 30-day package. And when we have more details, that's when I'll come back to the board and make sure that it's meeting your needs so that we can figure out if our logo is going on the supporting materials or not. So at this point in time, I'm happy to answer any questions related to those first 30 days. The SIP application, I believe, is due towards the end of February. That's why it's being rushed through at the beginning of session, which complicates the, like it's never really a time when we see a lot of work in the Ways and Means Committee. It's never a time when we see tax credits really considered, but it is of utmost importance to have Oregon show its work, that we are willing to work and we are ready for that CHIPS application from the state to be supported, so that we can support the businesses to bring down those resources to help us create better communities with better opportunities across the board. With that, I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm sorry I don't have more on site readiness.
It's okay. Commissioners, are there any questions or comments on the semiconductor conversation slide? Go ahead, Commissioner Fye.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Aaron, thank you for that overview. I was just when you said something about the incentives piece in the first 30 days, and I was reflecting back on my notes, what I wrote down back when we had that presentation. And one of the incentives that was being recommended was extend enterprise zone. That's not part of the first 30 days.
It is. I just shorthanded that to SIP and gain share because that's what we as a county have focused on. But yes, that would also include extending the sunset on enterprise and rural long-term enterprise zones, which are how other areas of the state have created more opportunity. They're shorter property tax exemption areas. The county itself has not, to my knowledge, opened up an enterprise zone in county unincorporated areas, but some of our cities within Washington County have. In addition, there's a number of other cities and counties that have looked at the rural long-term enterprise tax abatement program to incentivize their areas where they provide those advanced manufacturing, other support services that support this part of the industry. But yes, it is part of that initial 30-day effort.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you for the explanation, because in the previous presentation, the two were recommending separate, like extend gain share and
Yeah,
we're combining the two. So our board will see a conversation that combines the two, extending gain share and extending the enterprise zone. Okay.
Yeah, my expectation is there will be one or two bills depending upon relating to clauses and the laws that LC requires us to follow as far as how many topics you can have in one bill. Gain share has a separate sunset. It is only tied to the strategic investment program, tax abatement or SIP tax abatement. Enterprise zones don't come with a gain share type program.
Okay. Yeah, I just was referring. Thank you. That clarifies for me. Thank
So
you.
the form is controlled by the legislature.
Yes.
Other comments or questions?
I don't really have any comments that I didn't make the last time. I'm all supportive of having us take a look with caveats. That the state has to be an active partner. I mean, this is not fair to local government not to be. And then my other one is this goes back in my memory, and then sometimes we've dealt with my things I've kind of forgotten, but we looked once upon a time, many years ago, at enterprise zones or zones. And I thought legislative folks internally, I should say legal folks internally, told us it's not permissible for a county to have an enterprise zone. It was just for cities, but maybe that's all changed by now. So if that's the case, they'd have to enable through some legislation us to have an enterprise zone to do these things. Is that still a key?
Well, I thought that's what Aaron was saying. Was that
Maybe that's
legislatively, they have to allow us to do that.
Yeah,
because,
okay.
Historically, counties could not have enterprise zones. That was
okay. Well, that's still true. All right.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
in
Aaron.
unincorporated areas. Yeah.
the one question that I don't know the answer to, and we'll look up and make sure that I get all this detail right and confer with Tom and his colleagues in the general counsel's office to make sure I don't act as a lawyer in any way, shape, or form, is the rural enterprise zones might be slightly different, and that might be where counties have invested. I need to double check that though, so please don't take my word on that. And as to your comments, Commissioner, about being an active partner, we are trying to right size a investment package that the legislature will bring in the hundreds of millions of dollars to bear in site readiness, so that they are paying and how we run that program, I think is the other key piece of, are we going to continue to use the regionally significant industrial sites program or make modifications to it so that the state is really putting the money forward? Because that, I think, is key to the industry, is that they need those upfront infrastructure costs cared for. And one of the key messages that I've taken away from this board is not just the on-site, it is the off-site, it is just all the things that make the capacity possible, including the livable communities around it, making sure that it's not just one property that wins, it's that our community wins when the state invests.
Turn there. Just have one follow-up.
Go ahead.
Aaron, what you just said remind me of to ask this question, and I know you said there's 1,900 bills, and I'm not going to quiz you, but I am wondering if you're hearing any talks around if there is a bill to undo what, I don't remember the bill number, but it's in my notes somewhere.
Is it on this
The
topic?
yes,
Okay.
she mentioned the site readiness. My question is related to site readiness, to just be clear. And something that you said, Aaron, that reminded me, that's the question. There was a bill, I think, in 2014, 4078 in 2014, that does the rural designation, rural reserve versus urban reserve designations. Are you hearing any rumbling conversations about to undo that bill? What that bill did to undo that?
Did it pass?
In 2014, it did.
That's the bill that set the urban and rural reserves in
Mhm.
Washington County after the litigation. It's also referred to as the grand bargain, which is coming into question right now. There are individual bills related, I think, that are looking at specific areas where that might happen, but that's also where the super siting piece of what might come out of the land area, finding a large lot, may look at areas that have been designated as rural reserves as potential sites for super siting, and that would again take a chunk out of that agreement that was reached in House Bill 4078 in 2014. So rural reserves are a constant piece of conversation. There are some specific legislative concepts that I have not identified quite yet, but I am certain are in my stack that would look at some of those designations. I think that this, the other component to this package that might disrupt that bill is related to the super siting and providing that someone, likely the governor, with the authority to super site, even if it is a rural reserve, if that is the only means of finding identifiable industrial lands that can be made development ready quickly.
Thank you.
In case you didn't hear earlier, as part of board communication, Commissioner Fye had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Tom Vander Zanden and hear a little bit of history from his viewpoint.
Thank you. I was unfortunately in a committee hearing already at 8 a.m. this morning, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I forgot my question already. Oh, yes. So on the semiconductor conversation, you talked about not having seen an updated report yet. Do you know if there are draft versions circulating?
My understanding is that there's a memo, and it's probably, I can share that. That's the initial take, but they had to do more research and they were planning to meet again. I believe it's this week. And so it should be forthcoming what their final recommendations are, but I will confer with ECDEV and LUT to make sure that we have all of the information to you, and I will provide it with the Friday memo that comes out if I can locate it. But there still remains no central repository of information, which is unfortunate. And I'm trying to fix that so that we can all share the same information with everyone in the community at large.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that as committee members are receiving information that we, as part of the public members of the community, will have access to that information too. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for looking out for our interests.
No problem. We are not we have no one technically on that subcommittee that has finalized that report. So I will pull that all together for you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I think we're all set on this
Okay.
slide, this topic.
All right, next slide. Speaking of hearings I was at this morning, 8 a.m. hearing for me was the House, Housing and Homelessness Committee, where they talked about two components, the work that the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department is doing in this space, which is across the board, and they are a key partner to our housing authority in finding funding and working on projects to address the entire spectrum of housing from on the streets homelessness all the way through and up to home ownership programs. The other piece of that committee hearing was an update provided by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, related to the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that has been officially presented and is now turned into a legislative concept, which is about 66 pages long. And I have been working with the Land Use and Transportation Department to do an analysis of what those impacts have could potentially be on the workload of the county. But one of the things that we have raised is there are some significant questions about what the expectations of where counties with urban unincorporated areas would really be responsible for understanding what the capacity for the housing is and how that housing production can occur. In what types of incentives we would be required to put forward in those urban unincorporated areas. I think one of the foundational things that we have been trying to process with the state is really urban unincorporated areas look very different depending upon what sector of Washington County you're in, let alone what sector of metro you're in. Some urban unincorporated areas are little, I like to call them the Swiss cheese holes, but there are others that are areas where we've seen development happen that are at the edge of the urban growth boundary. And so setting expectations and not coming with funding to meet those expectations is just a foundational problem that Washington County can't fix without the state either investing or really making sure that there is a plan for the right level of planning to occur on those lands. We also need to have conversations with our partner jurisdictions at Metro and at the city level, because all of us are impacted by what the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is going to bring forward and put, further clarity around the expectations of how counties and cities address their Goal 10 requirements, which we're already required to make sure that our long-term planning documents are in compliance with Goal 10, but there are some modifications to what that means that are being looked at in that 66-page bill. And we are already partnering with our fellow metro counties in understanding, because we are the ones directly impacted by the proposed legislation, of what that might mean for each of us, and coming in together to speak to the resource needs, the capacity issues, and really who should be doing the work. And we will take that conversation to our partner cities to make sure that we can all walk in and make sure we're all sufficiently resourced to do that work, and also recognizing the work that we have already done in the metro region to start looking at how to address housing supply, housing capacity, and permanent supportive housing as all components of what the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is bringing forward. The other key component in all of that is making, as the state and metro and others have conversations about whose role it is to do what, when they talk about allocating housing to be developed in specific areas, that there is a clear understanding of what the role of a county should be versus the role of a city in providing for that level of urbanized housing. Another key component in that conversation is the development process and costs. So the time it takes to get from, I have purchased this piece of property and I would like to develop it, how do I fill out a land use application, through to, okay, I need my final certificate of occupancy. And that whole process has been, as you've seen, a conversation internally, making sure that Washington County is meeting the expectations of our development community and our board and the folks who are looking to purchase housing in Washington County. But also the cost component is always going to be a question. And one of those areas that they're looking is in the system development charges, which does not just impact Washington County as a county, but also Clean Water Services as an agency. If they start tinkering with how we pay for capacity building, currently we use system development charges to offset a portion of the cost of what it takes to increase the capacity of our systems, both in transportation and in those services that Clean Water Services provides in all of the new development areas across the county. And I have just been invited literally yesterday to participate in an informational panel related to system development charges. I'll be sitting with the League of Work and Cities and talking on behalf of, this might be news to Diane and Mark and Tracy, and I will talk to them about what they need me to say later, but also to LUT department, who I will also discuss with what we need to say. Sitting with them to talk about system development charges, why we charge, how we charge, the transparency in the process. And really the fact of the matter is that there is limited tools to pay for infrastructure, and you're putting the onus on someone. And this is the process that we all agreed to when revenues got cut short from the feds, the state, and our property tax base. So that's going to be another linchpin in this conversation, as far as making sure that there's a full and complete understanding of what it takes to be a local government, providing for development in our communities and making sure that our systems can actually bear the capacity that is being demanded of us as we look to increase significant amounts of housing pursuant to the executive orders, which my understanding is you will be talking with our staff about that this afternoon. And I will try to listen in if I can, but they keep having hearings. Apparently now that they're underway, they've decided to do their work. The final piece of all of this is, of course, going to be what the state is bringing to the table as far as resources for infrastructure, resources for capacity building within our staff across the state. You know, one thing that we constantly remind them of is important to help our sister communities that are more rural and have even less staff, but our capacity issues are real as well. And if there's an opportunity for investment in workforce to develop the capacity here, they should be investing in folks that work in all settings and support all counties and cities in their efforts to really build that capacity. But really also they need to make sure that their alignment of investment in infrastructure doesn't just meet one need, but meets all needs for communities if they really are going to demand a lot of housing to be built and changes to be made in the system and the number of units that can be built by the state. So it was a lot. Again, happy to answer any questions, and we'll do more follow-up as I get a more thorough reading of each of these bills, but I'll make sure that they're on your bill tracker list so you know what's going on as we know what's going on.
Commissioners, any questions or comments on this category? Nope, let's keep going.
Sweet. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to my colleague. Thank you.
Good almost afternoon, commissioners. My name is Dr. Khan. I'm a government relations manager here at Washington County, and I'll be talking about health and human services as well as the revenue space. Within the workforce, you're seeing that it's being prioritized within the legislature. There's a number of different bills that aim to explore workforce expansion through a couple of different means. You're seeing definitely that there's a lot more pipeline development now in the works. You're seeing that they're trying to retain workers. And you're also seeing that there's a really creative kind of set of bills that also tie to revenue in terms of tax credits for certain fields that are traditionally at the margins, especially people in the childcare sector and community health worker sector. You're seeing that they're creating a tax credit structure so that people are able to have more take-home pay. In addition to that, you're definitely seeing a lot more investments and bills and concepts that deal with infrastructure in the behavioral health space, whether it be more residential beds, more treatment facilities, or creating or examining what spaces or sites should be ready for behavioral health infrastructure to be built. Those are a couple of the things that I've already seen. And then finally, with regards to Measure 110 implementation, you're looking at bills that really span the spectrum of Measure 110 implementation, whether it's more workforce investments, getting counties more monies that they may have lost out on in the Measure 110 process, or some people that, some entities that are coming forward with re-examining the decriminalization of possession issues in relation to Measure 110. So with such a wide spectrum of issues, there are also, like Aaron talked about, there are a number of different placeholders in this space. So we don't yet have full bill language on a lot of these issues as they're being drafted. I think there are a lot more internal conversations that have to happen within the legislature before we get that language, but you can see there's just a lot of placeholders. And so with some of the issues that get worked out on the bills, I think it's going to lead to some subsidiary issues that are going to then find themselves into a placeholder. I will just add another issue that I've been kind of just tracking over the last week in terms of workforce is slots. It's slots at educational programs. And so a lot of the nursing faculty at many of the institutions, both in the Tri-County area as well as around the state, have been saying that because of issues that have arisen in pay structures, they're having trouble getting health and human services faculty. And they're not able to pay them what they can make in the public sector or in the private sector. And so what you're starting to see too come from the legislature is an examining of what do we need to pay faculty in order to expand the capacity of these nursing programs. I think I was reading an article, and I'm happy to review the article, so I'm giving you accurate information, but some of these programs could be accepting 200 students and they're accepting 30 or 40 students. And so that's creating a shortage of nurses that you're seeing happening all across the state. And so one of the things I wanted to add to this is that our bills that we're bringing forth this session, the 3 bills in the health and human services space, are directly responsive to these needs that are being identified by the legislature. And I think are really creating a good pathway for our bills to create not only conversations, but create pathways for their own passage. And so with that, I'll just take a moment to pause. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Nope, none here from the looks of it. Let's keep going.
Excellent. Next slide, please. So as I talked about before, and as Aaron has already detailed, there are a number of property tax exemptions that have been being discussed and that we're seeing a lot of placeholders for as well. And so just like Aaron was referencing before, I won't really repeat her words, but I will say that a number of the conversations are highly dependent upon what happens on the semiconductor conversation space and also in the Economic Development Committee. And I think once those decisions are made there, then you'll see these placeholders start to be fulfilled. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, you're also seeing tax credits for certain professions. And so this really spans a bunch of different professions. It's both in the health and human services space, but you're also seeing a real dedication of the legislature in terms of looking at rural healthcare. And I think that's really important, as we try to uplift all counties, that as we're doing with our own legislation this session, seeing how we can be partners to our colleague counties in this space and seeing how we can uplift rural healthcare also increases capacity across the board, across the entire healthcare sector. And so that's just why we've been kind of analyzing what's been coming out of those sectors. And with that, I'll just pause if there's any questions in relation to that. I'm sorry, I really wish I had more than placeholders to communicate to you at this point, but still waiting and seeing and tracking definitely.
Commissioners, anything?
Is there a list of the professions that they're looking at tax credits on?
I haven't been able to write all of the professions down, Commissioner, but I'm happy to craft a list for you and send it out. And if it's helpful to the whole board, I'm happy to craft that and send it out in the memo this week.
Maybe not to everybody. I would be interested. So.
Yeah, just go ahead and put it in.
Okay, sounds good.
I have one, and I don't know if I should have brought it up in the prior one or if here is okay. Seeing the full collection of legislative agendas that you linked to in the GR Weekly memo, thank you for that. I just wanted to bring to life what we had a chance to see with the Hillsborough list, similar to, well, in the Hillsborough list, you'll see that they're asking the state legislature for $3 million for the Hillsborough homeless shelter. We saw with the Beaverton shelter that they made an earmark to the federal delegation I can't remember if it was 1.5 million or 1.5 sounds right, less than 2 million for sure. So what we're seeing now is that there is the amount of money that is available to secure sites from the SHS measure and improve those sites. But we have two clear examples where there continue to be gaps, significant gaps for doing the improvements that are needed for these year-round shelters for homeless individuals. And so I think there's a story in that. So I just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to catch that amongst all of the detail that you as our great GR team are challenged to try and pull out. And then the other tidbit that I picked up on is last Friday afternoon, we had a tour of the Washington County Jail with the collection of Washington County mayors. There were 8 different mayors that were able to participate in, and with that, Laurel Brown, our facilities manager, gave an update to the mayors on our 24/7 needs. But the sheriff's office also made a presentation and update that had some information that has advanced since we had the meeting with them back in October when we had our jail tour. And it relates to, and I didn't write it down, I think it's Senate Bill 682 that passed last session, so 2022, which affected the arraignment process. And they now have 6 months of operational data. And once again, much of the information was shared verbally, but it has changed the process by which folks who have been charged go through the arraignment process. There isn't an automatic bail process anymore. And everyone has to have the opportunity of going through the process within a certain number of days. It has shifted the timing of the arraignments, as I understood it, to later in the day. So they're having a larger peak of processing and subsequent folks that have to go through the process. So it's all building towards more overtime and other impacts. So 2 things registered in my mind. One is that unfunded mandate, which related to that, it's the perhaps unintended consequences, because I think many people would agree that from an equity standpoint, there were good intentions with this, but like all things that are a change, there often is a change of process, and we learned from that. So I just wanted to make sure, since we didn't have our ACA for public safety at that meeting, that I just wanted to mention it here so that our government relations team would have the opportunity of following up with the ACA for public safety on that. So don't take my verbal summary as the actual facts. I just tried to absorb what I could. So Ms. Angie's shaking her head. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we try to work very hard to make sure that we're coordinating not just with departments, but with our ACAs, so we have a clearer picture. One thing I am focusing on as we're going through these bill trackers or going through these bills and the concepts that may potentially fit behind them is really understanding what those operational changes are, because operational changes are cost changes as well. And they just say, oh, you're just changing your process. There's no real need to understand what the fiscal impacts are, but that is just not accurate. And a number of things, I've already started the conversations around some related to the measure 114, if that should be implemented out of the courts or whatever, what the actual cost to implement that, the pricing of change is real, and it's something we are much more cognizant of as we go through bills and making sure that we have that full suite of information from our ACAs and what those impacts would be to the county so we can mitigate them better.
I'm with you 100%. Thank you.
I think at this point, this is the end of our hot topics. There is one bill that didn't make it onto my list that I'd like to just seek a thumbs up, which will be very hard to see, so I'm going to need it verbally.
Don't worry, we'll help.
There is a bill related to life jackets in boats for minors. It is a public safety, a life safety concern. It has an impact on Hag Lake, and our parks folks and our sheriff's departments have talked about it and would like to see the county support that effort to reduce the number of outside water drownings that occur due to the fact that younger folks aren't wearing life preservers, even though they probably should be. This would basically make it a requirement that children in boats be wearing life vests, suitable life vests for them. Within the program that we already support at Hag Lake with our life jacket borrowing program, so we have the tools there to do the work. This is just one more component for how we can do some enforcement and education around the need to provide those life preservers. So I'm looking to the board now to see if we can be at least a logo sponsor supporting that legislation.
Who's sponsoring this legislation? Has it gone through the State Marine Board, and who is asking us to sign on to a letter of support?
I don't know the full process, and I probably should have pulled that information, and I can follow up a little bit more if you're not comfortable today, and we can seek to get this moved forward. This request came internally from our parks folks to take a look at and seek the board's support for. It did go through a work group. It's also gone to the sheriffs for their consideration because they are the enforcement arm when it comes to on the water. And I'm trying to find the rest of the information, but it is in my email, which is always a challenge.
Do we have to give a thumbs up today, or can we come back to this next Tuesday?
We can come back to it next Tuesday. I'll make sure that the information, the full set of information is in the GR memo on Friday.
That'd be great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Doesn't this already exist? Isn't it a mandate? Isn't it? I thought it was a law that you, under a certain age, they had to have.
It's adjusting the age so that even older children, and I can't remember the threshold off the top of my head, which is unfortunate, but it's been a busy morning.
Okay.
But basically it'd be raising that minimum age for folks to be wearing it. It's still related to minors, but it is not, the age is fairly low right now. So this would be upping the age so that you're hitting more of your preteens.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions related to things you're hearing or information you would like to share out before we move to our next slide? Okay, then I will go to the next slide. So this is just a real quick summary. It's normally I do a prettier decoration or version of this, but there was too much information for a coherent timeline. So as always, we will continue to do the weekly bill tracking report that will come with the weekly memo on Fridays. And then we have currently scheduled some check-ins at work sessions. I am working with the clerk to see if I can come back to you a little bit sooner than February 21st, just because everything will change, especially in the semiconductor space in the next few weeks as we get more clarity around what's happening, but work session time is precious. But we will be checking in fairly regularly with the board to give you the updates, check in about particular policies. We will also work with the CAO's office and to make sure you have as much opportunity for commentary or questions of the GR team as we move forward, even outside of those work sessions where we are officially coming to. The other thing I wanted to note is related to the federal work. As I think the chair mentioned during her announcements about future meetings, the NACO trip is currently scheduled for February 11th through 15th. We are working with our VSA partners to get those of you who are out there in front of our delegation as just Washington County, representing our interests for that February 15th that date of February 15th, Zucker will be with you to also enjoy the NACO conference, learn what we are doing at the federal level as an association of counties, but also figuring out where we can best make a difference with our delegation and introduce ourselves to the new congressional delegate, Representative Salinas, as she has a large portion of her population residing in Washington County. The other thing that we've gotten in some information from, and we are working on what our process will be to help have your board guide us on, is the federal earmark process. We are expecting that it should, the information on how that process is going to work at the federal level will come out in late February, early March, is best guess at this point. What we are doing now is working with our ACAs to ensure that we have a comprehensive and broader list of potential earmarks that for your board to consider and prioritize. We're doing that in part to kind of, we'll use the NACO trip as part of the conversation with our delegation to see what they would like to pursue as far as earmark, what they're looking to prioritize in their earmark requests, and how we can find projects and programs, be it capital construction or one-off projects that we need to accomplish as a county, and finding the federal dollars to do that instead of trying to scrape every little ounce out of our general fund. But we are working with the ACAs to identify that list and help your board as you review it and set our priorities in that federal earmarking process. With that, I think that is the end of the updates we have for you, but happy to answer any further questions at this time.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Keep up the good work. You do a really good job of keeping us informed. I know it's very hectic down there with what you do, so know that your efforts are greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Chair. And we couldn't do this without all of our partners at the county in each department and the ACAs and especially the general counsel, making sure that we understand what things mean.
All righty, go team, go.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have a full afternoon of topics and we will pause now for a lunch break and pick up at 1 o'clock, where we'll go over Governor Kotek's executive orders relating to homelessness and housing starting at 1. Then we'll move on to time, place, and manner overview. And then later in the afternoon, have an overview of the transportation system planning. So I think so far so good in terms of our timing. So we'll see everyone back here at 1 p.m.